When my wife went to work, I supported her in every possible way. For the first few months, she came home and talked about what interesting things happened in their office. But over time, I discovered a terrible secret. I heard different traditions, but the tradition of colleagues sleeping with each other was a real discovery for me.
My name is Charles Cobb. A year has passed since the moment my familiar world collapsed right before my eyes. But it would be incorrect to say that the world collapsed on its own. I myself became the cause of this downfall, destroying everything around me. My struggle for honor came at a high cost to many, including at least 60 villains who paid for what they did. I merely lit the fuse of this situation. My wife was among those who deceived me, and I felt a strange pleasure watching their world crumble along with her. I used to be a happy and unsuspecting husband, deeply in love with my wife and content with our life together. Everything was perfect. We had been married for almost 5 years, owned our cozy home, surrounded by friends and kind neighbors. My job brought me pleasure, and the support of my family never left me doubting that I was on the right path. We earned enough to live carefree and save for a future, which turned out to be nothing like we had planned. I wish I could say something special about us or our marriage, but the truth is that I myself don't understand what that could be. I married my beloved while we were still in college. She was sweet, kind, and funny, always loving and affectionate. She wasn't the type to flirt around, never dressed provocatively, and I never doubted her fidelity. I work in a research and engineering lab that develops specialized electronics for NASA and the military. We jokingly call our workplace a computer center. Even though we tackle very complex tasks at work, at home, we prefer simplicity. We, computer enthusiasts, are not inclined towards tricks and schemes in personal life, as we are not too good at them. Many consider us prodigies, but we are more like teenagers than prodigies. In our world, where values and standards seem flipped, my life and work are marked by uniqueness. My wife Jay and I find pleasure in the little things, laughing at not-so-great jokes, discussing movies and underrated works, genuinely admiring the subtleties of existence. Although society does not always recognize our nonconformity, we know the value of truth. In my profession, where I develop software, honesty is the foundation of a career. We understand that losing the reputation of honest people could cost us everything. Jay, my wife, holds a significant position at the company Huska in the finance sector. This firm plays a key role in financing large-scale construction projects across the mid-Atlantic states. Despite the fact that their office, located in the heart of the city, employs many uneducated people, their understanding of money and ability to handle spreadsheets command respect. However, every meeting with her colleagues makes me feel as if I've returned to my school years, as all her colleagues seem to be stuck in high school in terms of moral development. Here is the story with our kittens, which we decided to name Lewis and Clark, became a vivid example of this oddity. One of Jay's colleagues seriously suggested choosing celebrity names for them, as if the names of the great explorers did not carry enough significance. This moment best illustrates the difference in our worldviews. They seek inspiration in loud names, while we find it in stories that don't require public recognition for their significance. In this world, where every detail seems prescribed, we try to find our own way, valuing truth and authenticity above all. I always thought that my aversion to certain aspects of my wife's job was only related to professional duties, not her personal views. How wrong I was. Unlike computer enthusiasts, who value individuality and come together to share unique ideas, financiers, it seemed to me, think exclusively within the collective consciousness, identifying themselves with the group. They become individualists only in pursuit of career growth, aiming to climb the corporate ladder. Although many of them I disliked, I did not feel aversion towards them at the beginning. My attitude began to change gradually, but it significantly changed during the Christmas party at Huska, which took place in an expensive hotel located opposite my wife's office. Everyone was happily socializing, drinking alcohol, dancing, and I often couldn't tell if I was talking to my wife's colleague or one of their spouses. At one point, standing at the bar, I accidentally overheard a conversation between two women. One of them told the other that she would need to somehow deceive her working husband to have sex with one of her colleagues. I froze, not turning towards them, and an inner voice commanded me to remain unnoticed. The details of the conversation seemed quite interesting to me, so I pricked up my ears and started listening attentively. They continued talking about how everyone is planning to go on vacation next week, but doubted they would be able to avoid work even during their time off. Then one of them mentioned that it would be possible to have some interesting fun during this trip. They glanced at each other and snickered maliciously. I still didn't understand what exactly they meant by the trip, having interesting fun, but what I really understood was that one of them was cheating on her husband on the side. This conversation left me confused and concerned. I remember during that party wondering, was I really married to that very woman? It seemed that those around might not take it too well. Then I decided to let go of these thoughts and immerse myself back into the party atmosphere, not returning to this question for 3 weeks. On that Friday evening, as I ascended the carpeted staircase from our basement, I heard my wife conversing on the phone. She said, "Okay, let's get down to business." What followed next left me in shock. After all, what do I have a husband for if not for this? My wife said, the context of the conversation unclear to me, but I didn't like the sound of it. At that moment, I turned the corner and saw Jay putting down the phone. "What does all this mean?" I asked, trying to speak without accusation. She jumped, clearly surprised by my presence. "Oh, that was Henry Thomas. I need to go to the office tomorrow, and next week I'll have to stay late because there's a chance to secure funding for a new project," she explained. This conversation reminded me of a dialogue I had accidentally overheard at a Christmas party, as if we were heading for a minor crisis. "This sounds like an emergency," I noted. Jay laughed. "I don't know if I'd call it an emergency, but it's definitely a great opportunity that we can't miss," she finished. "We've both worked so hard this year. I was hoping we could relax a bit this month. After all, we're together, and I don't want work to take up all your time and energy," I said. "Dear, don't be such a nag. We need to seize such chances when they come, or else you might lose them," she said, promising that everything would be all right soon. Then I unexpectedly asked about all those husband talks. "How many husbands have you had?" Her face showed shock. She didn't expect me to have heard that. Trying to hide her embarrassment behind a quick smile, she replied, "Just you, silly. That's just how we talk at the office. We team up to work on projects and sometimes joke as if we see our partners and colleagues more than our own spouses at home. It's our little joke," Jay confidently explained with a condescending smile, though her hands were shaking, making it hard not to notice she was nervous. "Don't get me wrong, I appreciate hard work and understand that work can have its own jokes and pranks, but I've always been concerned that our marriage had too many secrets." That Saturday, waiting for Jay's return, I reflected on all this secrecy. I always shared stories from my work and tales I heard from colleagues with her, but realized she never talked about her work. It seemed as if she had 2 lives, one at work and another at home, and I hardly knew anything about her work life. I had been to a couple of her company's events, but never really learned anything substantial. This realization deepened my reflections on how she had distanced me from this part of her life. When my wife finally returned on Saturday evening, she immediately went to take a shower. Meanwhile, I was preparing steaks and couldn't stop thinking about a recent phone conversation between my wife and her colleague. Despite its innocence, it made me shudder. I can't say I liked it. Similarly, the conversation between 2 colleagues, Jay, often came to my mind. It was surprising that across the street from Jay, there were 2 buildings. One housed a large medical clinic, and the other was a hotel where they usually stay. I was struck by how many guests of the Christmas party were well informed about this hotel. I kept convincing myself that her colleagues might have just been dining together and accommodating foreign clients at the hotel. However, trapped in oppressive thoughts the following week, I increasingly leaned towards a different explanation of the events. Deciding to distract myself, I left the laboratory and drove to have lunch in my car. Parked near my wife's workplace, I had an excellent view of the street leading to the Marriott Hotel. What I saw on Monday around 11:45 on the eve of lunch troubled me deeply. Nearly half a dozen couples, each consisting of a man and a woman, crossed the street and headed into the Marriott Hotel, and around 12:30, they were returning back to the offices. There were no groups of 3 or 4 women who usually gather for lunch together, only couples. My wife was not among them, but I still felt out of place. The next day, I observed the same scenario, only with different couples. I realized I couldn't just walk into the Marriott and check the lobby. Too many might recognize me, including my wife, if she saw me there. Never in my life did I think I would need help in such a situation, whether it was a dream or a nightmare. Eventually, I decided to take action, and that same day, hired a private detective named Harvey Madison. I shared everything I knew with him and explained what I needed to find out. After I gave him a photo of my gin, he promised to do nearly the impossible. "Don't think about it. Continue living as usual," he told me, suggesting that it might not lead to anything serious. And if it turns out to be something truly bad, I would soon find out. I hoped that all my fears would be unfounded and return to work, hoping that the money spent would be just a small price for peace of mind. My money was not wasted. On Thursday morning, Harvey welcomed me in his office to share the unpleasant news. On Wednesday morning, my wife entered the lobby of the Marriott Hotel at 11:45. Henry Thomas wrapped his arm around her waist, and they lingered at the registration desk long enough to get a key, then headed to the 4th floor. The return was recorded almost at 12:40. Harvey Madison had a brief but extremely confidential conversation with the secretary, who was present at the time my wife and her colleague were at the hotel, becoming regular visitors. The conversation Harvey had at the registration desk cost me $300, and he warned me that this was just the initial fee. I needed irrefutable evidence, which required installing a video camera inside the room. It was not entirely legal, but for a certain fee, the idea could be realized, and I planned to start recording only when my wife was in the hotel room. My thoughts about my wife quickly darkened, eager to achieve my goal. To make it happen, the porter had to help us. Harvey needed to find out the room number Jay and her colleague would choose, after which the porter booked the same room directly before and after their next visit. This allowed Harvey to install a hidden camera in the room, requiring additional expenses for rental and a bribe, which I paid without hesitation. The following 7 days were tough for me. I tried to keep my distance from Jean as much as possible, but she noticed my strange behavior and asked what was wrong. I joked that it was all because of work, though I doubted she believed me. When she wanted to make love, I convinced myself that if I hadn't caught an STD by now, I wouldn't get infected this time. And although we were together, my heart was somewhere far away, accompanied only by anger and pain. The feeling that my marriage was losing its strength enveloped me, despite the lack of clear confirmations of my suspicions. The realization of my wife's infidelity tormented me, yet I tried not to jump to conclusions without irrefutable evidence. Everything changed when I learned about the video from the room, which needed to be checked for complete certainty in my suspicions. Following Harvey's call, the porter booked the room for the next Wednesday, both in the morning and in the evening. The next day, Thursday, I arrived at Harvey's office, where the evidence of my wife's infidelity with her colleague Henry Thomas awaited me. This 40-minute video, where my wife, my world, was with another, marked the end of everything I knew. At that moment, I remembered a joke about a husband who, upon discovering his wife's infidelity, threatens her with a gun, promising that she would be next. I decided that I must act according to the plan I had formed in my mind, but first, I needed to go away for a few days to gather my thoughts and decide on my next steps. I couldn't stay under the same roof as my wife, so I talked to my boss and took leave until the end of the week. If anyone asked, I said I was going away for the weekend to Wallops. Returning home, I quickly packed my things, left a note, and headed west. My old friend David, living near Baltimore, agreed to give me shelter for the weekend, providing me with a temporary refuge and the opportunity to rethink everything. While I was at home, anger did not overcome me. However, I realized that my behavior was far from perfect, and I needed some time to calmly think through a plan of action. The complexity of the moment forced me to lie to my wife for the first time, leaving her a note. Although I was uncomfortable about this lie, I understood the necessity of leaving, and I had no intention of canceling the trip. West gave me the opportunity to ponder whether I truly knew this woman who so skillfully managed to separate her life as if juggling between two husbands without losing balance. I realized that my wife mistook my trust for naivety. But I was never naive, and deceiving a trusting spouse is not the wisest act. The times of unconditional trust are gone, and now my marriage seemed to be destroyed. The true meaning of childhood friendship is that they know you like no one else does. Who you were, who you have become, and what you always think about. They see everything, and my friend, as soon as I crossed the threshold of his house, immediately grasped the essence of the situation. I shared the news with him, and he, as a true friend, shared my anger. Nevertheless, his wife Marie tried to calm us both, convincing me that she was not trying to justify Jean, but wanted me to be sure of my actions and not lose my sanity. She insisted on the importance of a female perspective to understand the situation, especially when it came to my relationship with my wife and her colleague. Marie criticized the overall behavior of women in the office, arguing that it is they who control sexual relations, either participating in creating such an atmosphere or turning a blind eye, calling men pigs that should be educated by women. Her husband, reluctantly, agreed with her words. My feelings were on the edge. I wanted to destroy everything around, divorce my lying and cheating wife who betrayed me, possibly not for the first time. I longed for Mr. Henry Thomas and every deceiver in the office to regret every day spent at work. But Marie warned me, emphasizing the importance of realizing the possible consequences of my actions. Perhaps there were reasons I was unaware of, and my wife might genuinely regret her deed. Maybe she was being blackmailed. Then why didn't she tell me? I didn't understand the joke of hanging out with her colleague during work hours, but I realized I was just trying to calm myself. When I decided on the divorce and simultaneously sued the company where all the spouses worked, including my wife, I faced a difficult choice. I spent a lot of time that weekend pondering, trying to understand if I had missed any signs of her infidelity. She always seemed so loving and supportive, especially when I shared work problems with her. But how could she lead a double life without the slightest remorse? Her strange reaction to my question about the wife and her comment on the difference between good and evil made me wonder if she was a sociopath. At some point during the weekend, I realized that by leaving, I had given Jay and her colleague husband an excellent opportunity to use our home for their dates. This realization angered me, but then I concluded that it no longer mattered. I was determined to divorce her, regardless of her actions. All that was left for me to do was to collect my belongings and leave her with this problem. I carefully planned my next steps and returned home on Sunday evening to save money. We decided not to record the infidelities of other spouses in hotel rooms more than once, except for my wife and Mr. Thomas, to reduce the cost of room rentals. For Harvey's employees, this meant only 2 hours a day. As for Jeannie, I wanted to prove that it wasn't a one-time incident. It took me just 2 weeks to gather all the necessary evidence. These weeks were a real test for me, and although someone might say that one instance was enough to prove infidelity, I wanted to get back at everyone who knew about her actions and didn't tell me. It took a bit longer since most of the spouse employees met once a week, although some did it more frequently and some less. We couldn't catch everyone, but we caught enough to achieve my goals. Jay and her work husband stuck to a schedule every Wednesday. I tried to stay late at work often, but it didn't help. Being at home became more and more torturous. I took it upon myself to organize another urgent trip to Wallops on Thursday. In fact, that day, I stayed in a hotel near my wife's work. Then, on Friday evening, I went west to see David and Marie again, and on Monday evening, I stayed in a hotel again. During this time, Jay began to express dissatisfaction, claiming that I was ignoring her, and she was right, because from my side, the relationship had cooled off. She couldn't understand how tense the situation had become. For some reason, I was still trying to maintain the appearance of normal relations at home, but my attempts were ineffective, and it began to reflect in her behavior. I started sleeping in the guest room and leaving the house early in the morning. In any case, this did not prevent her from spending her lunch breaks on Wednesdays with her colleague, their meetings becoming increasingly lengthy. As I found out, at least 2/3 of the employees in his company were cheating on their spouses, including most of the managers. There's a saying that a fish rots from the head down, and it seems to be true. Several months later, I saw 3 videos in which she did not mention me at all. It was not slander. She simply did not mention me, as if I had ceased to exist for her. This only intensified my irritation. Nevertheless, there was a certain sexual tenderness between her and her colleague, though without genuine intimacy. They were more than friends, but less than lovers. It became clear to me that my marriage had collapsed the moment I saw my other half hugging her colleague around the waist and heading together into a room. After witnessing their intimacy, I realized there would be no discussions, no justifications, no apologies. I was ready to end our marriage and everything that connected us. I did not want to hear her apologies or see her tears. I was certain that I did not want to hear that it was just sex and nothing more. 3, or rather 4 dates were sufficient grounds to override any of his relationships with her. At 10 a.m. on a Monday, a special visitor entered the office of the company where my wife worked to offer his services to Jay and Henry Thomas, right at their workstations. After that, he headed to the CEO's office to continue his mission at the heart of the company. The situation seemed almost ironic, given that the CEO was George Walker, a man at the center of the scandal. At 67, Walker was married to a woman who was only 29, leaving me puzzled by his interest in a 45-year-old secretary. Some people remain a mystery to me. My day continued with my phone breaking the silence with its ringing at 10:20 a.m., but I hurried to turn it off. Meanwhile, employees of Harvey Company began distributing heavy envelopes around the office, addressed to the employees' wives. Inside these envelopes were photographs, videos, and detailed reports that could serve as grounds for divorce proceedings. Henry Thomas's wife received an especially bulky envelope, while others received letters with information about what was happening in the office where their spouses worked, offering them a chance for an open conversation with their spouses. Everyone was left a brief message stating that the disclosure of information was thanks to Ginny Baxter. I wondered how many friends my changing wife would have left after all this. By the next morning, the company had seemingly evaporated, and at least 20 divorces followed in my search's wake. The scandal spread through the office, destroying even those marriages where no evidence of infidelity was ever found. Management attempted to rid itself of everyone involved, but ended up being drawn into the chaos themselves. Rumors and news of the scandal quickly reached the press, and 2 weeks later, an article was published mentioning working spouses, a phrase, I assume, was coined by someone who did not understand the reality of our world. Soon after, the business was shut down, and the office remained empty for a whole year. In the end, I met with Jay in my lawyer's office. After weeks filled with angry messages, denials, and bizarre attempts at bribery and negotiation, she finally acknowledged some responsibility for her actions. With tears in her eyes, she confessed to having been swept up in the tumultuous waters of corporate culture and the world of high finance. Harvey always wondered why people around seemed so self-assured, considering themselves superior to others, and thought they could change en masse. This question hung in the air, whether it was due to the shared secrets that bound their risks or because of distorted social norms. I could never understand. I wanted to say that I had stopped understanding them too, but my concern for my marriage with Jay and the reasons for our divorce never faded. I could have spent my whole life trying to decipher these people, or I could just walk away. I chose to leave. My revenge didn't work out as planned. I won the court cases, but the company's finances were at zero, and Henry Thomas, having lost almost everything in the divorce due to my actions, couldn't pay the lawsuits against him. The irony was that my wife lost her job and demanded alimony after the divorce. My lawyer argued that her unemployment was a direct result of her infidelity, which led to the divorce, and ultimately, she received no alimony. Living without love was hard, but I couldn't foresee the consequences. One of the spouses who surprised me the most was Shayla Thomas. One evening at a bar, she approached me, dazzlingly beautiful, which should have been enough for any man. I had barely started drinking my first beer when she introduced herself, sat next to me, and gently touched my leg. Her straightforwardness caught my attention. She said she was divorcing her husband, but wanted to take revenge on him even more, offering to help her in this revenge. Imagine, you'll be with me, and it will be the final blow to the man who hurt you. I hesitated over her words about humiliation, but decided to help her. And I did everything possible, acting until late at night. I began telling you about the period when I spent 2 weeks in a guest room up until the moment I started taking care of my wife, which required certain sacrifices from me. One night, I was on the verge of dehydration, getting up to drink water every hour, and when I left the next morning, Sheila informed me she was going home to upset her husband. I reminded her of my evening statement and expressed a desire to repeat it. Her laughter and promise were a comfort to me. When Jay's family learned about what was happening, their anger flared against me. I decided to talk to them, showing a video that brought them to tears and made them apologize. Their tears were no longer so bitter, and although they tried to convince me to give Jay a second chance, I could not forgive her. My heart turned to stone, and I do not recall her even attempting to ask for my forgiveness. During the divorce, I share the story of infidelity with colleagues, noting that my skills and knowledge were powerless against such a simple task as catching an unfaithful wife. She was caught meeting with a lover in a car, thanks to a bribe and hidden cameras purchased online. This discovery made me reflect on the extent of infidelity and how easily people hide their affairs. Thinking that perhaps everyone around me lives the same way made me feel like an outsider among colleagues who might also not be strangers to such situations. Encountering Jay on the streets or in stores, I try to avoid conversations. Her look, full of a desire to cry, still hurts my heart, but I turn away, knowing she understands it's better for me to keep my distance. I am no longer the person she once fell in love with. My former life is behind me, and now I must start from scratch, realizing that disappointment and resentment have torn my heart to pieces.
That's the end of the story. Write your opinion in the comments about this story. It will be interesting for us to read it. Also, do not forget to like and subscribe to our channel so as not to miss new, equally interesting and exciting stories. Good luck!